from low-income Americans to accommodate the illegal aliens arriving into the city?
Yes and no. It's not necessarily a reduction in spending, but it is a reduction in space. We have a homeless shelter, for example, that was approved for the North Shore of Staten Island, which was intended on serving a specific population of presumably U.S. citizens who are experiencing homelessness. That shelter is now under consideration for the migrant crisis. And we've seen that happen in numerous locations. Look, we've had a homeless problem in New York. I mean, that's not unique to this city. It's not unique to any city in America. What is unique is the unprecedented way we've adapted ourselves and how quickly we have. I mean, we've never leased hotels en masse to address homelessness in New York. So it's not necessarily a reduction of services. It's more finding the space and capacity to keep both populations in shelters. We had about 60,000 people in our homeless shelters prior to the migrant crisis. Now, when you add the migrants and the New York City homeless, it's somewhere around 100 and something thousand.
You just brought up the leasing of hotels. In June of 2023, city officials said that it cost $385 per night to provide shelter to an illegal alien family unit. Meaning New York City was spending almost $8 million a day. By August, it would given the more than 57,000 illegal aliens. President of the city, Mayor Adams, said the cost had ballooned to $9.8 million a day, which would be around $3.6 billion per year. With now it's, I think you said 65,000, the number's up to. How is the city covering these costs?
Well, with tremendous difficulty. Obviously, we have one source of revenue. It's the city's general fund. And if the money comes from the general fund and goes towards this purpose, it cannot be used to other purposes, which sounds pretty basic, but there seems to be some difficulty in understanding that at times. The bigger problem is that these costs have continued to grow over time as the number of people have continued to come in.
I want to focus on, I want to go back to the money comes from the general fund, and I want to focus on the other costs that are being cut. So, you know, the mayor announced possible 15% cut to all agencies. I think I read something about possible overtime for firefighters, cops, sanitation workers, correction officers, all being cut. Can you go into that a little more? Because the focus today's hearing is what this disaster at the border is costing Americans, and specifically New York City residents. Not just New York City residents, but a lot of my constituents out on Long Island go into the city for work. So, you know, when there's less cops around, bad things can happen. So can you please just go into what the costs are for the citizens of New York City?
So this mayor, like many executives who govern cities and agencies, will look to cut essentially the easiest things first. So first to go in this case will be police and fire and sanitation, et cetera, overtime, because that's something we obviously issue on a weekly basis, on a daily basis to different people. The next thing that'll go is some contracted services for supplies, for goods, for things that each agency needs to perform their basic functions. Bigger picture items, though, the mayor hasn't released the list of what they're proposing yet, but in January of this year, facing just some minor budget headwinds, he listed cuts to the city university, cuts to pre-K programs, not filling 10,000 vacancies in the city workforce, cuts to the New York City Housing Authority, and cuts to supportive housing rental assistance programs.
What's happening to the businesses, the business community, because, you know, people can't get rooms for tourism because they're taken up by the people who are here from the southern border? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we've certainly seen some businesses complain and have problems. There was one published report about restaurants within some of these hotels going out of business and closing their doors. So there doesn't seem to be, at this point, any vibrant economic activity coming from this population.
Do you know how much the city will be paying to lease Floyd Bennett Field from the federal government?
Yes, it's $21 million for the year, in addition to costs in terms of bringing infrastructure and other necessary items to the site.
So we're looking at about $1.7 million a month.
Correct.
Plus whatever it costs to, you know, put the migrant shelter in place on Floyd Bennett Field.
Right. That doesn't include the operating costs of the actual facility. Right.
Now, obviously, you know that I served a career in the NYPD, and many of our specialty units call home to Floyd Bennett Field. Aviation, ESU, scuba. There is a Floyd Bennett Field Civil Air Patrol, Floyd Bennett Composite Squadron. There's the Marines 6th Communication Battalion. In addition to being a complete financial burden on New York City, as one of the few members of the City Council that actually stands with law enforcement, wouldn't you agree that this is a major security risk for not only the residents of New York City, but the millions upon millions that come visit annually?
Yes, and I know of many members and chiefs of the NYPD who are part of those units on that facility have raised some objections about the security now that would be present on the site. I don't know of the result of that since this lease has only been about a week old, but it is certainly a concern. It wasn't a concern, though, when we talked about Fort Wadsworth on Staten Island, which is the same situation, only it's an active military base where migrants would be, in theory, held.
In just 20 seconds, what do you think that's going to do to the city agencies that you oversee in New York?
You mentioned the fire department, the sanitation department, and the Office of Emergency Management. The burn rate of $10 million is more than we spend on all of that per day right now. So that's how much money in comparison to other city spending we're talking about. So there's no choice. It'll end up being, as we've been told already, the first thing to go will be overtime, which these agencies themselves are short-staffed as it is. So now you're going to reduce the man-hours for all of them across the board, essentially.
Give me an idea, if you will, because Mr. Borelli, you said 62,000, did I see the people in New York City this year?
Correct.
62,000. Give me that number
In
and what that looks like.
So 62,000 people are being basically given 202 hotels and about 8 or 9 given the day hercs, which are tent cities that are staged in parks, parking lots, and things like that.
What have you heard from those in your district about the rising cost? Is this more difficult for them to make ends meet?
Look, the cost concern is more about, for them, the city spending and the impact that migrant shelters have on their lives. We have a shelter that opened up in Staten Island a few weeks ago where the neighbor who owns a house has the showers for the shelter essentially abutting his backyard. On the cost side, we're starting to see that play out now. I mean, in truth, when this crisis first started, if this was 5,000 people or 10,000 people in a $107 billion budget, we wouldn't have even noticed that. Now we're seeing the downstream impacts on cost. We don't have the luxury that, with all due respect, my friends here in the federal government have to spend in deficit. So when we take, an apple from this jar, put it in the other jar, it has to come from somewhere else.
Who do you think they blame for that?
I think they blame President Biden 100%.
Mr. Borelli, can you talk more about the impact on school budgets and what you're observing in your district?
Sure. So we have hired 3,500 teachers proficient in ESL. We have an additional 1,700 teachers that are certified bilingual. Part of the problem is that a lot of those teachers are bilingual in Spanish, and now we're seeing languages from other parts of the world where we may not have readily available services for them. The cost per kid in New York beats you by a significant dollar amount, $38,000 per student, and I would estimate that's very close to the actual cost because many of these students would be on the high end of the spending spectrum because they are coming with certain special needs. In many cases, they're not up to speed on third grade or fifth grade levels yet.
So when you hear the ranking member on the other side say, this isn't serious, this is just a dog and pony show, is there any wonder to anybody in this chamber why we can't solve this problem? They don't even think this is serious.
I don't know whether I'm the dog or the pony, but it is very serious to New Yorkers.
You know, I'd like to also point out that, Mayor Adams didn't seem to think this was serious either for a long time, did he?
No, and a part of me is very thankful that he has evolved and seen the light on a lot of the spending on this issue.
Me too. And we're not even talking about all the kids that have died of fentanyl or all the lives and families that have been ruined that way, are we? That's not what we're talking about today, is it?
No, sir.
We're not talking about the crime, the MS-13 gang members that come in, destroy families and communities. We're not talking about that today.
No, sir.
the difference, how they're talking out of both sides of their mouth, like, hey, we want to help you solve the problem, but it's really not a problem. It's actually a benefit. Mr. Borelli, did you notice that at all? With all the,
I did. I mean, we've talked about work authorizations, which may be a solution for the population, but it's not a solution if the next group of people can come tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. If there's no stopping of the problem coming to our city, the issuing of work authorizations and permits won't resolve it.
Do you believe that Secretary Mayorkas has been aiding and abetting the entry of aliens who have no legal basis to be present in the United States?
Well, somebody certainly is. They're coming on buses provided by some NGOs or government entity, so there's certainly someone aiding these folks in coming to New York.
Well, do you believe this administration is aiding and abetting?
Sure. I think to your point earlier about the big picture, this administration ran on changing border policy. They came in February, say roughly of 2021. They made changes, and now, almost 2 years later, we can unequivocally say things have gotten absolutely worse, not just for New York, but it sounds like for a lot of the rest of the country.
And my state's borne the brunt of it. You have children arriving in your state, the sex trafficking, the forced labor camps, the gangs like MS-13. Again, do you think this administration has been aiding and abetting that criminal conduct?
Is that question for me or?
This is for you, sir.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I know of one migrant shelter facility in Brooklyn that has reached out to me for assistance in getting new security measures at their migrant shelter, specifically facial recognition technology to keep people who are affiliated with gangs out of the shelter.
That's 45,000 encounters in the last 5 days. Mr. Borelli, can New York take on just another 45,000 more illegal aliens?
No, I think financially and due to space concerns, the inn is full.
I have a pretty good idea. How about remain in Mexico? Mr. Borelli, would you go along with remain in Mexico?
It certainly seems like before January of 2021, this problem was a lot less significant for places like New York.
My colleague has a point about New York and the 40, 50,000 individuals that are coming in. But look at it this way. If you gave them a work permit, could New York use 40 or 50,000 workers right away?
Well, New York's unemployment rate is twice the national average. So while I'll certainly accept that there's many businesses and companies that could use more workers, it's unclear why.
But they could probably use them.
Mr. Borelli, regarding New York's sanctuary policy, there was a law put in place that had kicked immigration and custom officials from Rikers Island after people are arrested. They no longer cooperate with detainer requests. Is that correct?
Yes, that was 2014.
So there's zero cooperation right now to deport individuals who are arrested. And we know that at this Roosevelt Hotel in Manhattan, there have been dozens of people already arrested. Are they being put back in that facility?
For the most part, yes, if they're not issued bail on spot.
Because of New York State's bail law, so they get arrested, they're not even going to jail, they're being released back onto the street, and the taxpayers are paying to have them housed in this luxury hotel. Is that what you're saying?
Correct, and we've seen arrests at the Roosevelt Hotel and other sites when police have made enforcement actions against everything from domestic violence to illegal mopeds and scooters.
Okay. New York City has a non-citizen voting law. I pulled that up here, and the language says that people would be eligible to register to vote if they are a lawful permanent resident or authorized to vote in the United States and have been a resident for 30 consecutive days or less. So if the work authorization that my colleagues are pushing for were enacted, these individuals would be registered to vote after just residing in New York City for 30 days.
Correct. Thankfully, we both are plaintiffs in a lawsuit that is in the process of ending that policy.
Okay.